Welcome to Aging Insight with your host, John Ross and Lisa Scholmeyer. This program is made possible by
Welcome to another edition of Aging Insight. I'm your host, John Ross, here with Lisa Scholmeyer, and we are elder law attorneys right here in the Arklatex. And as elder law attorneys, our practice is devoted to trying to assist people as they navigate through, particularly their later years, where they want to try to maintain their independence, they want to avoid becoming a burden on their friends and neighbors and family, and they want to preserve those very needed resources that they've spent their whole lives accumulating. And we know as attorneys, we know that you can do this, that you can make it through and you can do it the way you want to do it. The problem is you've got to have knowledge. And there is no other area that is quite as complicated and as intricate as this, because you're bringing in all of these different areas of law. You've got wills and trusts and taxes and probate and guardianship and Medicare and Medicaid and all of these different things. But if you've got, I can't make you an expert, but I can give you enough information right here on this program to where you can at least make some educated decisions and know when you might need to get a little more specific advice for your situation. Now, we talk about lots of different things on here, but one of the biggest ones is paying for long-term care.
Right, John. One of the biggest health crisis, emotional crisis, financial crisis, legal crisis comes from needing to make provision for the long-term care of a family member. A spouse that's dealing with their loved one who has undergone a health crisis, that they can no longer care for that person at home, or whether it's a parent or grandparent. This particular point in time is just full of a lot of anxiety, a lot of unknowns, and because of that time, often people who are trying to help their family member, they're looking for information and they're desperate for the correct information. And so what happens is we have folks, ask other friends or neighbors or Sunday school members that have gone through a similar situation. They might research something on the internet. They might, look for advice. The problem is so often this, through what I call through the grapevine type of advice, is often incorrect. And one of the biggest issues that folks who are facing that crisis for paying for and obtaining long-term care, there's a lot of myths, misconceptions about how to protect a home or a savings that has accumulated. And people often will make the wrong move because they've gotten the wrong information. And so that is a big part of the crisis. And sometimes we create another crisis because we acted on information that was incorrect.
That's right.
And
this area of law is just rife with rumors because of so many people are dealing with it, and so many people have different experiences. They then share those experiences, which may or may not have any real basis in what really happened or what was supposed to happen.
Right.
But for most people, the vast majority of people who need a long-term care scenario where they need to go to a nursing home, for example, are going to be unable to afford the $5,000 a month that would cost to private pay. And since only a very tiny percentage of people have long-term care insurance, that means that most people are going to rely on Medicaid. Mm-hmm. Medicaid being the only government program that will pay directly for that kind of care. Medicare doesn't, only Medicaid. And so with Medicaid, and this is kind of our topic today, back in 2005, a law was passed called the Deficit Reduction Act. And in that law, there was a provision that said that if a person gives away their assets for the purpose of trying to make themselves eligible for Medicaid,
right,
that they will not be able to receive those benefits for some period of time. And it said that any gift or transfer like that you made within 5 years, starting from the day you apply for Medicaid going backwards, that any time within that 5 years or 60 months would create this penalty. And so this is what's often called the 5-year look back or the 5-year transfer penalty. But what the rumor turns into is I got to get all my stuff out of my name within 5 years.
Right, and this is probably the most common question we have, or in fact, I visited with some folks in the office today that were talking about, well, we know, we tried to convince mom and dad to put the house in our names and transfer the CDs and everything in our names 3 or 4 years ago, but they just wouldn't do it, and now we're at a crisis.
Right. And we've done a whole other program on why it's a bad idea to give away assets. What we really wanted to focus on today was kind of doing the Mythbuster thing on this whole 5-year look back. Because yes, there's a rule, but there's a lot to this rule. It's not just as simple as if I give away something in the last 5 years, Medicaid's not going to pay for me. It's not quite that simple. There's a lot to it, and there's exceptions to it, and that can be some of the most important little tidbits of knowledge out there. So let's start by talking about what this penalty is. The penalty is based on a transfer made with the intent of trying to get rid of your assets so you'll qualify for Medicaid. Basically, the government doesn't want to have to pay for you if the only reason you don't have any assets is because you gave them all away. And so they say if you've given away any assets within that 5-year look back period, they're going to penalize you. The question is, how do they penalize you? Well, on the they take the amount that you give away, and they have a number that they divide into. So, for example, in Texas, for every $156 that you give away, you're disqualified for 1 day of Medicaid. So if I gave you $150 and applied for Medicaid today, they wouldn't pay for tomorrow. If I gave you $300, it would be 2 days, and so on and so forth. This rule is the same on the Arkansas side, it's just calculated a little different. On the Arkansas side, for every $4,955 that I give away, I'm disqualified for 1 month. So it's the same rule, it's just calculated a little differently. So I guess the first thing here is, if I give property away, it's not that I'm disqualified forever.
Right, you're just disqualified for whatever the penalty period is that is calculated based on the state formula.
That's right. And depending on the circumstances, that may not be, I may be able to eat a few days or even a month or two, instead of having to worry about all of that. So that's how you calculate the penalty. But there's so much more to this 5-year penalty. And so we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to get into the meat and bones of all of it. So stick around, we'll be right back.
Hi there, I'm Larry Sims. It's been my privilege for the past several years to be a volunteer board member of Hospice of Texarkana, and there I'm able to represent community members like you. We continually customize our end-of-life care to better meet the needs of our community. As an example, our medical director and nurse practitioner still make visits to homes and facilities. Call today to learn more about the help we can give your family. Hospice of Texarkana, the nonprofit hospice established in 1985 for the community, by the community.
I'm so glad we found the Wadley Senior Clinic. Their team specializes in caring for older adults, and their doctors listen and work with me to keep me healthy and independent. With monthly educational programs, x-ray and lab, and state-of-the-art exam rooms, I get expert care and understanding about what I'm going through. Best yet, they're easy to get to right off the interstate at Jefferson. See what Wadley Senior Clinic could do for you. Wadley Senior Clinic, where healthy relationships begin.
Welcome back to Aging in Sight. I'm Lisa Scholmeyer. I'm here with John Ross, and today we are Mythbusters because we are busting some myths and giving you some information about something called the 5-year look back period, which is something that a lot of folks who've encountered long-term care Medicaid are aware of, because this is the general rule that says if you give away assets within any time 5 years prior to applying for Medicaid assistance, then you are penalized, and the state, through its Medicaid program, will not assist with your long-term care needs for a certain number of days or months, depending on the amount of assets that you gave away during the 5-year period prior to applying for Medicaid. So that's very simply known as the 5-year look back rule. And you know, John, one of the things about the rule is the rule says if the patient gives, or the applicant has given away assets or transferred assets for less than fair market value.
Right. That's every time we have this conversation with somebody will pop up with, well, what if I don't give it away? What if I just sell it to them for $1?
Well, the law is smarter than that.
Yeah.
And so there's a provision that says transfer the asset for less than fair market value.
That's right.
So you can't give a nice piece of land, you can't sell it for $1,000 when it's really worth $10,000.
Right.
So
you'll still get penalized on the difference.
on the
there.
$9,000. That's right. So, but John, you know, the law says if you transfer assets for less than fair market value with the intent that, well, your intention being to qualify yourself for these Medicaid benefits. And so the next thing a lot of folks say is, well, you know, yes, I gave all of my kids $14,000 apiece because my tax man said that that was okay under the gift tax, but I wasn't even thinking about Medicaid. I was hoping I never needed it. So I didn't do that with the intent to qualify for Medicaid.
Yeah.
What does the state typically say about that?
Unfortunately, in these situations, first of all, the state takes the position that if you have transferred any of your assets within that 5 years, that it's subject to the penalty, period. This even includes, for example, gifts to charity. Even gifts to charity are not exempt from this penalty, but there is a small savings provision in there. This provision says that a transfer that was made exclusively for a purpose other than qualifying for Medicaid doesn't count, that won't be subject to the penalty. And this is typically where you're thinking about, for example, putting a $50 bill in a grandkid's birthday card. Maybe even something as significant as buying a 16-year-old a new car. If it happened 2 or 3 years ago when you were in perfect health, and now you've suddenly had a stroke, you know, you can look back and say, look, you know, every time I had a grandchild turn 16, I bought them a car. I bought this child a car when they turned 16. I didn't realize that that in 2 years I was going to have a stroke out of the blue. And so that might be an example of a transfer that was made exclusively for a purpose other than qualifying for Medicaid. But Lisa, that it still goes back to the point that the state is going to start out with the position that
Right.
every transfer is subject to the penalty, and it's going to be up to the person to try to prove otherwise.
Right. So, you know, if you are a person that has tithed to your church and you can show a history and a record of, you know, always tithing, you know, a certain percent or a certain amount to the church on a monthly basis, whatnot, you know, they're not going to go back during that 5-year period and, you know, penalize you on your regular tithes, so long as you're showing that, hey, this is how I normally operated. But if, you know, you suddenly made some larger gifts, more generous gifts to a charity, to children, and your health was maybe more fragile, they're definitely going to assume you were making those gifts and transfers with the idea of getting your assets down.
That's right. And if they do make that determination, then again they're going to divide however much you gave away by that penalty, and that's going to be the number of months that they're not going to pay for you. And that can be pretty significant. I've had some situations. You know, we had a gentleman, and his son had gotten into financial trouble, so his son had deeded his house to Dad. Well, Dad had there was a mortgage on it, so Dad had to refinance it into his name, but son made all the mortgage payments. For 5 or 6 years. We had every check where that son had paid for that house that was originally his own house.
Right.
But as Dad got a little bit older and was starting to have some health problems, they figured, you know what, son's now past his legal problems, but it looks like we're about to have a new set of problems with Dad, and so they deeded the house from Dad back to son. Well, when 2 years later, when Dad had a stroke and ended up in the nursing home, Medicaid would not pay for him.
Yeah.
They said that property was clearly Dad's, even though the son had paid for it. Does not matter. He had a house. He gave it away. It was within the 5 years.
Yeah.
And by all accounts, they had probably done it because Dad's health was getting bad, and they knew that was going to be a problem.
Yeah.
So it didn't meet the exception. So you've got to remember that they are always going to assume that whatever gift you made did happen. Now, we did mention that this is a 5-year look back. So if I'm Bill Gates, richest man in the United States, and I were to give away my entire $90 billion fortune in 5 years and 1 day, that transfer would no longer count against me.
And you know, John, and that's where we get a lot of folks saying, well, you know, the parents should put their things in the children's names, you know, and so we can start working on that 5 years. And like you said, we've done another program where we think it's a real bad idea to put your assets in the name of children.
Right. Just because you think you're protecting it from the nursing home by giving it to the child, that doesn't mean you're not exposing it to that child's divorce, bankruptcy, death, divorce, all kinds of nasty things. So there are ways to protect it without giving it away. But there are some exceptions where you can give property away.
That's true.
Even within the penalty, you know, all this penalty stuff, there are exceptions to that rule where you can give assets away. We're going to talk about those when we come back from this break, because there's several of them and we want to cover them all. So stick around, we'll be right back.
The Wadley Senior Clinic has been such a blessing for our family. Because they specialize in geriatric care, they take the time to really focus on Dad's needs. Their exam rooms are specially designed for seniors, and they offer lab and x-ray on site. With monthly educational programs on health and wellness of the mind and body, our healthcare questions get answered. Best of all, they accept Dad's Medicare benefits. See what the Wadley Senior Clinic can do for you. Wadley Senior Clinic, where healthy relationships begin.
Hi there, I'm Larry Sims. It's been my privilege for the past several years to be a volunteer board member of Hospice of Texarkana, and there I'm able to represent community members like you. We continually customize our end-of-life care to better meet the needs of our community. As an example, our medical director and nurse practitioner still make visits to homes and facilities. Call today to learn more about the help we can give your family. Hospice of Texarkana, the nonprofit hospice established in 1985 for the community, by the community.
Welcome back to Aging Insight. I'm John Ross here with Lisa Scholmeyer, and today we are talking about the Medicaid transfer penalty, what people often refer to as the 5-year rule or the 5-year look back. The rule that says that if you've given assets away within the last 5 years, that Medicaid or the state will not pay for you if you go to a nursing home. And we've talked about that a little bit, but one thing I wanted to bring out is that there are in fact a bunch of exceptions.
Well, and John, the way I like to explain this when I'm visiting with a family about Medicaid is I like to draw the parallel to your income taxes. You know, the law is the law, and we must follow all the rules. And so, for instance, come tax time, you want to follow the law, pay the legal tax that you are due to pay. But, the tax code offers a lot of deductions and credits, and you certainly want to take advantage of every deduction and credit that applies to your situation. And there's nothing illegal about that. In fact, that's using knowledge to minimize the amount of taxes that you pay. I like to bring the same type of knowledge to dealing with an application for Medicaid, where I want to take the exceptions that Medicaid offers for transfers, and if it's applicable in the situation, I want to use them, so that way we can preserve additional assets and qualify that patient for the Medicaid services. So, these rules and exceptions are out there to be used. So, let's talk about what they are.
Yeah, so the first exception, and this one may seem a little strange, but there's no penalties for transfers between spouses.
Right, between husbands and wives, they can give each other anything that they have between themselves, and there's no transfer penalty.
No penalties there. And the reason there's no penalty there is because when it comes to a husband and wife, Medicaid doesn't care whose name it's in.
Right.
They don't care whether it's in one name or the other name. But that can be very important. For example, if a husband has Alzheimer's and he's the one that's going into a nursing home, it may be important to transfer his assets to his wife, so that if she dies while he's still suffering from this disease, those assets can be protected where they won't go straight to the nursing home. So first of all, there's no transfers between spouses, but that doesn't really help you get qualified for the benefits. Some of the others, though, can. So for example, the first one on the list here is that you can transfer assets to a child who has been declared disabled by the Social Security Administration. So if a child's been declared disabled, doesn't matter what age the child is, whether we're talking, when I say child, I don't want you to just think of a little,
Minor,
little
right.
8-year-old, but if you have a 75-year-old child who back in when he was 40 was hurt on the job and started receiving Social Security disability and received it from then on, that is a disabled child. And you could transfer assets to that person without penalty.
That's right. So, and these days, 1 in 4 adults in the United States have a disability.
Yeah, it's very common.
And so it's very common, and a lot of folks don't think about it. And then one of the other exceptions is you can transfer assets to any person under the age of 65 who is disabled.
That's right.
Does not have to be a child. So a child, no matter what the age, you can make a transfer. But if there is a grandchild, a niece, a nephew, or a daughter-in-law, some other friend or family member that is disabled, you can make a transfer.
Could even be your next door neighbor if you like them that much.
Yeah.
If they're under the age of 65 and also disabled, there is a way that you can transfer assets to them without penalty. So that can be a huge one. Now,
well, wait, let me ask you one quick.
Yeah.
We don't want to do you want to transfer those assets outright?
no, absolutely not.
Okay, so I don't want folks out there to just jump on and say, "Hey, my daughter-in-law is disabled. I'm gonna give some assets to her." That's not how. There's
Right.
a particular method you have to go about doing that.
Yeah,
so.
there's and the other thing is you want to think about that disabled person themselves, because they may also be receiving benefits.
Right. So you
and there are ways that you can transfer those assets without affecting their benefits either, if you do it correctly. Now, one rule is on the Texas side only. This is just for our Texas residents. In Texas, there is also an exception for transfers to certain types of college savings accounts for the benefit of minor grandchildren or children. So if you have a child or grandchild who is under the age of 21, it's possible to set up certain types of college savings accounts and transfer those assets to them and make yourself eligible for Medicaid in the process. So, for example, Lisa, I had a lady and she had a stroke. She was at the nursing home. She had about $40,000, which she couldn't have
qualify
but
for
she
the
had
assistance.
4 grandkids, all under the age of 21, and of her $40,000, she took $10,000 and put it in each one of their college savings accounts, and that made her eligible for Medicaid. So that's an exception, but it's only a Texas exception.
That's right. And it's only for grandchildren or children, not great grandchildren.
That's right. One other one, if a child moves into the home with you and they are taking care of you in the home, and they do that for 2 years,
Yes.
and during that 2 years, that keeps you out of the nursing home, then the state will allow the transfer of that home to that child.
Right, to the adult caregiving child, but the child has to move in to the home with the parent.
Right.
And,
Not
yeah.
the other way
Right.
around. Not parent moving in with child.
Right.
It's child moving in with parent. And there's a one or two little other that are kind of obscure. For example, if 2 siblings both own a piece of property and they both live there, then they can transfer it back and forth to each other.
Right.
I've only had that one time in 15 years.
But who knew the exception was there until you had that situation?
But that's right. But the key is knowing these exceptions and also knowing how this penalty period works, because it's more than we can go into today, but you can make that penalty work to your advantage by knowing these rules. So don't just think that you've got to get everything out of your name within 5 years. That's completely wrong. There's a lot more to it than that. But now you know, and you know because you've been watching Aging Insight, which is what we're here for.
Right. So we look forward to seeing you next week. And remember to pick up your copy of Aging Insight magazine. And you can catch us on Saturdays on 98.5 on Aging Insight Radio. But we'll see you right here next week.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for this week's Aging Insight program with John Ross and Lisa Scholmeyer. This program is made possible by
Investors who take the time to check the credentials of a financial professional can greatly reduce the chance of falling victim to a fraudulent scheme. That's the word from the U.S. Commodity Futures Trading Commission. To help, the CFTC launched a new effort to protect consumers from financial fraud. Called CFTC Smart Check, the campaign includes a new website that offers investors access to quick, effective tools to help them check the background of financial professionals. To learn more, visit smartcheck.cftc.gov, prepared by the CFTC.